Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, if you're not satisfied with your love or sex life, I want you to know that I get how painful it is. Sometimes it's hard to know what to do to change things up and get the results you want. But having spent 20 years as a dating and relationship coach, supporting thousands of men to have the relationships and sex they want, I know it's possible for you when you get the right kind of support. As a woman coach, I bring a unique advantage by helping you understand how women think and feel and why they say and do things that can be so frustrating for you. My specialty is being able to tell within minutes why you're losing attraction, trust, or respect from women, and how to turn that around. Even though you've likely been raised to think you should be a man who doesn't need any help, it just doesn't work that way because none of us were handed a guide to love or sex. So every month by application, I open my calendar to a few men for consultations. Men are amazed to walk away from these sessions feeling more confident in and out of the bedroom. Coaching isn't for everyone. I work with men who are willing to be honest about their role in the situations they've created. So if you're still playing the blame game, this isn't for you. But if you're ready to take action and have a love and sex life you feel great about, book a time to meet with me. Go to shanajamescoaching.com/consult and fill out the form to tell me more about you so we can set something up. That's shanajamescoaching.com/consult. Enjoy today's podcast. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm your host, Shana James, and this is episode 300 of Man Alive. And I am so excited and touched, and I may cry many times throughout this episode to be here with three incredible men to talk about the state of men in the world and what they're doing and how they're supporting men and what is needed. And I want you each to know that before I introduce, actually, I should introduce you first. We have Ted Bunch here as the co-founder and chief executive officer?
Development officer.
Chief Development Officer of A Call to Men. We have Jed Diamond, who is here as a therapist, as a founder of Men Alive and the Moonshot Mission for Mankind. We have Kenny Mammarella de Cruz, who is called the Man Whisperer and founder of Men Living and teaches and facilitates men's circles and trainings for how to work with men. And you have all been in the field for decades. And you've each inspired me with the work you do and with your commitment to men. You know, it's not an easy role to stand up for men, especially in this day and age. And you all have some of the deepest hearts of the humans I know, and a strength and a conviction to, continue to support men and to support our world, because I think we would all agree, but you can tell me if you disagree, that when men are hurting, the world is a much rougher place. And that if we can support men to heal, then everybody is safer and we have more peace in the world. So, again, I just want to thank you for being here, and I'm excited to dive in. Does anyone want to say anything before we do?
Just for the records, it's Men Speak, men's groups.
Thank you.
I'd hate, there might be an organization called Men Living.
Right. And
and I'd hate for them to say, oi, wait a minute.
Thank you. Men Speak.
Mm-hmm. I would like to say, Shana, that I'm honored to be here with you and my colleagues. And also, you talked about our commitment to men, but I really want to lift up your commitment to men. And the vision and the leadership that you've provided in this space, using your platform, your influence, your voice, and 300 episodes. That's quite an achievement. And it makes me think that, you were really ahead of the curve on the podcast
Yeah.
everyone's doing podcasts now, but 300 episodes, that's
And I think
amazing.
it's been 7 or 8 years. It's been a
Yeah,
long time.
you
Yeah.
were really, you were really ahead of things. So thank you for,
Mm,
this opportunity, but also for the 300 other opportunities you allowed folks to speak about.
thank you. Thank you. And I think just quickly before I ask you questions, I want to say what you're reminding me of, Ted, is um, each of you is of course special. And to me, Ted, when you and I were getting to know each other and I found out that you adopted 2 children with your ex-wife after you were divorced, and knowing that you are also fathering a gender nonconforming child, as I am, and I've leaned on you, for that reason many times. I just knew that you had a heart of gold, and the way that you've navigated your divorce and staying in a loving connection with your family has been really, really beautiful to see.
Thank you.
And yeah, and Jed, you have 17 grandchildren, 2 great grandchildren. How many kids?
6.
6. Okay. So you are a father, right? A father, a grandfather, a
Right.
great grandfather. And also you've been fathering men really in the world for decades and writing about the father wound and how you have transformed your relationship, from the father you had and the struggles he went through to your commitment to your son and your children and all the men you work with. And you've also, stood by me and guided me and mentored me. And so I'm eternally grateful for that. And Kenny, you are one of the deepest humans I know. And I love how you have at least one foot, in the realm of spirit and the ether, and you also have a very solid footing on the ground. And as people will have heard in your bio, right, you were raised in incredible situations of war and struggle and threat and racism. And you've come out the other side being able to sit, I think, with some of the greatest pain and suffering that people feel and walk them through to hope and to belief, in what's possible. And you've done that with me too. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so our first question that I would love for each of you to answer in some way or another, and feel free to iterate, or if you have a different question that feels more true to you as I ask you a question, I trust you all implicitly. So the first topic is, what are you currently doing to support men that you find is most effective for helping men to be healthier and happier and have an impact on the world that they can be proud of?
I'd like to kick in with rather than what I'm doing, I'd say it's more about the being.
Mm,
And what really hurts is the loneliness, the isolation, the disconnection, the secrets, the deep, deep wounds that have, on one hand, been totally forgotten about because they were left in limbo, and could not be looked at or survived. And on the other hand, might be running the show.
yeah.
And I would say the most important thing, thank God I got stuffed up in my life, because in going down and going deep to unstuff myself up and meet myself in those places,
Yeah.
I can now meet other people in their places. And it's not saving or fixing or talking, it's sitting next to in the ship
Yeah.
where we might die together.
Yeah.
It's the being together and the meeting. And for me, a moment of meeting there, forget about the processing or the why or the who, it's just the moment of meeting there.
Yeah.
Somehow, something magically shifts in the dark shadow and it opens in the gold shadow, and everything kind of starts to flow.
Yeah.
So, in whatever shape or form that happens, for me, it is all about the being. And on one hand, it's really scary.
Yeah.
On another hand, it's really liberating. And man, it takes courage, because generally I find I dedicated my life to surviving and avoiding that. So many men that I work with and sit with have done exactly the same. That is the no-go area.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to go. Slowly, gently, so that place can be met.
Yeah.
And the healing kind of then is sustainable rather than a fix.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that makes some sense.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. I appreciate what you talk about in the the dark shadow and the golden shadow and the way of being where you can where pain gets transformed, right? We're not trying to fix people or change people or make them different, but that in your capacity to sit with someone in their pain instead of running away from it, blaming them, shaming them, using psychological labels, putting them in a psych ward or a prison or right, all these things, like you're actually sitting in the heart of the pain and in being with them, helping them. I think your golden shadow to me is right, helping them see who they really are and in that sense of self-love, self-compassion, to see who they are and what's possible for them.
And no way is it just me.
Yeah.
My thing, Jed's going to laugh and you're going to call me a young whippet. Now I'm going to be 60, which is a big deal for me. 60. I don't remember being 40 or 50, but apparently suddenly I'm going to be 60 this year. It's just right for me to pass everything on. And that's my thing, is training people, supervising people. And the people have the courage to go there themselves.
Yeah.
And the people have the courage to go there with the other facilitators and other people, and to make this normal rather than clever or smart. And it's the same with, men don't speak and men this, that, and the other. Yeah, the media love it. It's not true. Well, it's certainly not true in my life, and it's not true for the men in my life. So it's us. There are a lot of us.
Yeah.
And we do it in our own language, in our own way, in our own communities, in our own hearts and souls. And it takes balls.
Yeah.
And community to hold
each other. Yeah. Thank you.
Jed, do you mind if I'm going to jump in there? Because Kenny, I'm glad that you opened it with the being, because when Shayna first asked the question, currently, what are we doing to support men? I'm going right to the work I do. I'm going to my role self. As we say in the Call to Men, we don't want to be in our role self. We want to be in our whole self, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I went right to that place that men go, the production, and this is what I'm doing, and this and that, which are all wonderful things. The organization that I founded and worked for, Call to Men, is doing amazing work with men and young men and boys, and around the country and even around the world. So I'm very proud of that. But I really like what you said about it's more of the being, that the way that we can the way that I can lead is by being the example that I'm hoping other men to be. Yeah. Right? Whether it's as a father, being the father that I wanted for myself, for my children, right? That's how I've been the father that I am, is really what I would have wanted from my own dad, and being the man that I aspire to be and continue to aspire to be. I've been doing this for a long time, but there's always these layers of socialization that get peeled back, and there's still more socialization that's embedded in there that needs to be addressed sometimes, And the difference is, and I really like that you said, you brought up for me that really, one of the examples that I like to give is that we really see men as the same. Like those men who even do those harmful, terrible things, not excusing that, and they need to be held accountable, but our socialization, how we're taught to be men, how we're taught to view women, how we're taught to raise our boys in particular, is not very different. Wherever there's a patriarchy, it looks pretty much the same around the world, right? So, but my awareness is really probably the thing that separates me, that I see it when it comes up, and it's like, oh, got to address that. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Let me go correct that. Where it's really, it's not that I'm living this perfect life, but I'm aware. And I think that transparency, sharing that with men, really makes a difference, where we are inviting men and not indicting them simply for being men. And we are calling men in and not calling men out just for, because they've done something. Yes, we want to hold them accountable, but we also want to address those things that you mentioned, the loneliness, the secretness, the disconnection, all of those things that stop men from being their full authentic self. So thank you for connecting us to the being of it all.
Yeah. It's reminding me too, I'm listening to Boy Moms. I think Jed, you and I are, and maybe you finished it already, but it's bringing up for me too how when men or boys are depressed or feeling unseen, unsafe, it's often more acting out, or it can be more acting out, right, than going in. And then once they've acted out, then they become some kind of criminal or a troublemaker or someone in the system versus it's harder for someone to look at them and see, oh, what is underneath the surface? What has caused this? What's the pain here? And I think, Jed, you can speak to that as well. In all of your work that you've done with men and the people who love them.
Indeed. Well, I love what you both have said, and you, Shannon, have said so far. I wrote down, and I'll share 6 areas that I think are important that we address, and we are addressing together. And the first one ties in with what Kenny introduced, that I could say in 5 words what that is for me. And it's plays well with others. Because one of the 6 things that I think we need to address is the age of the individual hero, the Lone Ranger, is over. That this is a time where we must come together, both for ourselves, to deal with the loneliness with others, and to address the many issues that need to change in the world. So that's one. The second thing that I think is related that I'm trying to deal with is the recognition that we're at a time where systems are collapsing, and that what is emerging is still somewhat undefined and still in process. That's number one. Number two, it feels to me that this is a time where men and men's work, as we all are doing it, are needed now more than ever.
Yeah.
And the third thing is we really can't separate men's work from women's work. They're really opposite sides of, in some way, of the same coin. And, all those roles that we are taught that men must be are the same things that women have been taught that they cannot be.
Right.
So men must be tough and strong, and women were told in many ways they cannot be tough and strong. And the opposite is true. The things that women were told they have to be, soft and gentle, were the things that men were told they cannot be. And these things are changing. And the next thing relates to that, which is the traditional values of strength and power that men have had are not toxic. They're not bad. They just need to be in a context where they're not demanded and we're not restricted from the other parts of humanity.
Yeah.
And the final thing that I think I'm doing and we need to do, and we're all doing, is we have to take care of each other. That these are really difficult times, and we all, in the helping work that we're doing, are affected by the systems that are changing, the collapses that are going on. And in a sense, we can't afford to lose any of us. Yeah. We need all of us together. And the only way we can do that is to take care of ourselves and take care of each other.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you're speaking simultaneously to, this question and the next question, which is really going to be about, okay, well, what else do we need, right? What do we need more of, or how do we do more of this? So I'm appreciating that sense of a systems view also, right? That we are currently in a world where many of the systems are falling apart, are painful to live inside of, thinking about men's work, can't separate men's work from women's work. And then, Ted and I having gender nonconforming children and like right now there's this whole range of gender, and that there's humans work, right? And in some ways we don't want to overly, what's the word? We don't want to, kind of whitewash and say, well, everybody's the same in this way. But at the same time, there are so many um, ways that we can see that we socialize boys from a young age to have certain ways of viewing the world and interacting with the world. And so, yeah, all of this is an incredibly complex arena. So I'm wondering, Ted and Kenny, if there's anything, in what Jed said also that you want to respond to.
Go on, Ted.
Thank you, Kenny. Well, there was a lot that he said, and also what you just said, Shayna, and it makes me think about what's needed for men is a space to be able to talk about these things just as we are.
Yeah.
And that there's this common ground. Look, you can see with the men on the screen here, there's we look like men, but a little different from each other. We might be in different communities, but this thread of manhood, masculinity, male socialization shows up in the same way, harms us in the same way, and men harm women in those communities, and the gender expansive folks in those communities as well in the same way. So there's some things that need to be challenged here, but the common ground, I love the common ground that we have, and I think that's what Jed was leaning into also. That we really need to be there for each other, and that really to promote transparency and vulnerability and emotional health. We run from it as men, but to really show this as a strength and not as a weakness. And when I'm with youth or when I'm with adult men or even professional athletes, and I talk about vulnerability and ask them when someone is vulnerable and shares their vulnerability, do you see them as weak or strong in that moment? And they all say strong, but
Really?
we don't want to be that. We don't, we see it in others, but to go there ourselves, it's such a challenge. But when we see it in other men, we do see that as strength.
So they actually do say that the
yes,
boys and the
absolutely.
young people say that they can feel the
Absolutely.
strength. Wow, that's
Absolutely.
awesome.
Right. So if you think about some of the athletes, Michael Phelps, for example, talking about mental health and depression and so forth and so on, and I use him as an example. Do you think less of him or more of him? And he's like, well, more of him. I mean, he has a record for gold medals in the Olympics, but that's powerful as well, and they see that as a strength, not as a weakness.
That's great. Yeah.
I kind of fancy breaking that down a little, because in my experience as men, people don't run away from that. I'd say
people don't run away from vulnerability and
exactly. Yeah, I'd say as men, we don't. As infants, we don't. But as boys, I'd say that's when the boys do.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
When men first come to you, do you see a difference versus once they've been with you and they've been in your circles and they've started to feel safer? Like when they first come to you, are they really, okay with vulnerability?
Sometimes.
Okay.
And some people might overdo it as a performance for acceptance or as something they've made a personality out of. And for me, it's all about unlearning, undoing, and letting go of who they no longer need to be. And that's just a perpetual flow.
And whether it's that protective self that they've taken on, a little more macho, or vulnerability as a role or a personality, either one sounds like you're saying they're finding something more true.
Absolutely. And it keeps changing. And I would say some people don't even realize what's gone on or what is going on because they're simply becoming a product of their environment. And if the environment suddenly says, right now we are boys, and in order to be boys, because we've just discovered we're boys, we have to be a bit nasty to the girls because that's what boys do, then that's what they'll do, not to cause harm, to experiment and find out,
Yeah.
which is very strange. And that's when they start running away from vulnerability and acting out, playing out, finding out.
Yeah.
But having done some work in boarding schools with the boys as well as with the masters, they want to be vulnerable.
The boys.
They see the power, the boys, they see the power in the vulnerability. They want to be harmless. They have a lot of pressure on them to perform as well. But they are so careful to not be excluded. And I would say the two things in my experience that men and boys fear the most is abandonment and humiliation.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, they will sell out on themselves in order to not have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Or they will show off rather than show up. And these are the things that are so easily undone. And for me, it doesn't matter about the age of the person, it's the stage of the person. And I've worked with men in their 60s, 70s, 80s who are 8 years old when they went to boarding school.
Yeah.
And that's where they're stuck. And it's not to disrespect boys or men or the stage that they're in. It's like, here's some interesting information, and here's your opportunity to choose how to be. And, one of the grounds, we've been holding online men's groups since the day we went on lockdown, every day online. One of the ground rules is experiment with who you are. And kind of find out on the edge. Another one is play bigger than the rules. Obviously, there's confidentiality and respect and own what you say and stuff like that. But it's not about, and very often new people will come in and it's like, okay, whose nose do I need to punch in order to go up the pecking order? How do I need to be in order to be accepted? And it's like, no, it's not be like us, it's be like you. And find out who you are. And we don't need to be the same. We just need to be true. We need to show up. Let's find out and let's learn from each other. And let's learn from each other's failures as well as successes. Then we're in it together.
I love that, learning from each other. And the speaking to the level of maturity, that we can look as though we're 50, 60, 70, 80. And internally, I've seen this with my dad too. I mean, his father passed away at the age of 13. And there is a way that I experience, I can feel the 13-year-old in him, right? The emotional 13-year-old. And so when there's not when there's no education about this or no context or nobody understanding, oh, yes, you may be an adult, but you still have these young parts in you that are running the show, then I think humans, men, everybody, right? We don't know, oh, I could actually grow up these parts. I could, step into more maturity, or there's even more maturity that's possible, right? I think that to me also seems like educating humans in that way is needed as well.
And to just jump in with one last thing to do with gender, a curious thing has happened over the last couple of months in one of my closed groups. And it's a young men's closed group. There are 10 of them and one of me. I'm not under 30. And we explore our inner critic and our inner protector, etc., etc. And they're really getting to know their inner child. And then sheepishly, one of them said, well, I don't know how to say this. In fact, I'm sure I'm doing it wrong, but I think my inner child's a girl. And then it started showing up. And it's like, what an incredible thing to have in common and to uncover that the free-spirited, safe child is genderless, but more of a little girl than a little boy.
Yeah.
That's purity. That's
amazing.
Absolutely wonderful.
And to have the safe space to talk about that, to share that and understand that. Yeah.
You know, I
And
was,
exactly as you say, to grow that part, express that part, and let that part be part of the personality.
Yes.
can
Yes.
I jump in here? And I love
Please.
Jed's point on this too. But when you were sharing, Kenny, and you made the point at the end about the group member that you know, vulnerability is gendered, right? So if I'm gonna be vulnerable, that's really what women and girls do. I'm tough. I'm a rock. You know, I'm not afraid of anything. I know all the answers. I know where I'm going. All of those things. Where vulnerability, I don't have to ask for help. Where vulnerability is seen something that women and girls express,
Yeah.
that real men don't need to be vulnerable because we're tough, you know, that we don't need those things. We don't need anyone. So your group member who says that, I can see how someone would identify with, and maybe they really do feel like their inner child's a girl. But I think that many of us may feel that those are things that girls express and not what boys
Right.
express,
Yeah.
right? Even any emotions, when we tell our boys to stop crying, we're telling them to stop feeling, right? They don't know the difference. So, you know, it's a very confusing thing. And I was wondering, Jed, you know, if you have any thoughts about that also.
Yeah, let me jump in with Kenny had said that in his groups he has people from young to 80-year-olds. Well, as an 80-year-old, let me tell you a little bit about my story, if you will.
Yeah.
Before I was born, I'm not going to go into the whole 80 years, but before I was born, my parents had been trying to have a child for many years unsuccessfully. And I was conceived in a way that at the time was unusual, which was injecting my father's sperm into my mother's womb. Uh, and in 1943, when I was born, that was an experimental procedure.
Yeah.
And so when I was conceived, finally, they were very happy, but they were sure I was going to be a girl. I don't know how they discovered that, but they were sure I was going to be a girl. So when I came into the world, they had girls' names, they had girls' dolls, toys, and so on. And when my little penis was evident to them, they were shocked and didn't quite know what to do. It took quite a while for me to get a name, and I won't go into my naming, but that was a complication. And even more than that, I grew up with a disconnection from various reasons from my father, who some of you know a little bit about my story of he became increasingly depressed when he couldn't support his family doing the work that he loved. And he took an overdose of sleeping pills and ended up in a mental hospital. So I grew up without a dad from the time I was 5 years old. My mother had to work then to support the family. And so I pretty much grew up on my own. The good news about that was that I was totally outside the gender demands that most boys had because I just made it up as I went. I did whatever I wanted. I got on buses from the time I was 8 years old and traveled in Los Angeles and did things. So the downside of that was I'd never learned to trust other people.
Mm.
I was totally my own person, but my fear of abandonment and disconnection from loved ones made me feel that getting close to anybody is dangerous.
Yeah.
And so I can be a free spirit, but I got to do that on my own. And I was pretty successful in the world doing on my own because of a lot of reasons. You had to be. I had to survive, but it made a real difficult time in my relationships.
Right.
And those that go to Mental Live and see my website, you are greeted by my little video of confessions of a twice divorced marriage counselor, which was kind of the pinnacle of my career, being a marriage counselor that didn't work. And I started figuring out what I could do to have a better relationship.
Yeah.
And to do that, I found that I needed to be with other men in safe spaces.
Mm.
And I think that's the key to boys and girls being able to be who we are. We need to be in safe spaces, a system, a context, a container that allows us to be who we are. I was lucky. I found a men's group that I've been in now that's been meeting regularly for 45 years. And my wife, Carlin, will tell you that a lot of the reason that my third wife and I, Carlin, have a successful 44-year marriage is because I've been in a men's group that's been meeting for 45 years.
Yes.
So I think part of, I want to say a couple of things in addition, and then I'll turn it back to you about the gender non-conforming children that you mentioned, Shana, and Ted did. That I think I don't have any gender non-conforming children, at least that I'm aware of, but I do have a gender non-conforming grandchild that I'm very aware of.
Yeah.
So I think if you don't have children, if you live long enough, you're going to find that gender is becoming more fluid in many ways. But I also want to say that in many ways, I think gender has been, has always been, oriented towards basic types, a male type and a female type, whether you call them archetypes or you call them genetic, X chromosome and XY chromosome, with some exceptions. And I think part of the, am I male or am I female? And do I have a choice? Is this something that's totally fluid? You can choose. If you don't like being male, great, be female. So I think part of the solution to all of that is to be able to have context early on where we can be safe to explore who we really are.
Yeah.
And I think when we do that, we're going to find that there are inherent biological differences that are important, that go back into our, certainly our genetic past, our evolutionary past, our mammalian past, that tell us about who we are genetically. And around that, obviously, we need to find out who we are as individuals. And that's part of what we're doing here today.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that too, the who we are as individuals. And, for this person in your group, Kenny, who has the inner child who feels more like a girl, right? That's 100% valid. And it does have me curious too, right? Are there ways that we just label masculine versus feminine? Being a relationship coach who started in the world of masculine and feminine polarity, and then having a child who exhibits all of the polarities at the same time, right? And then kind of wondering, like, is there a place to shift how we're talking about this? Someone who likes to lead versus someone who likes to follow, or someone who likes to, I don't know, there's words confuse this whole thing too, right? But if we're only talking about vulnerability as a feminine trait versus a human trait, I think there's the danger in there.
Truth is, it's not just this one guy. It's all of us.
Yeah.
Each and every one of us. And I am totally capable of toxic masculinity and toxic femininity.
Yeah.
I'm kind of better at the toxic femininity than the toxic masculinity.
Interesting.
Because that
how would you describe that?
Toxic femininity for me is criticism and withdrawing. Okay. Emotional withdrawing, the cold treatment, stuff like that.
Yeah, which I do think it's important to acknowledge, right? There is the if we want to call it toxic, totally. And many people like to take that label off, right? But the unhealthy versions of the feminine too.
And I'd say it's the most efficient way to break a boy's spirit and make him behave, because boys run around making a noise, shame him, break his spirit, and there you go. You've got a broken boy that's not going to embarrass you in the shopping center.
Yeah.
And toxic masculinity is the yang expression. And I was brought up more with the yin. In fact, I'd say toxic femininity is generally the acceptable way of controlling people. And it's like nice people do toxic femininity, nasty people do toxic masculinity, and very often with toxic femininity you can't quite put your finger on it.
Right.
And I think another aspect for me is God, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't have genitals.
God.
Mm-hmm. Or am I getting a little bit too cosmic?
No, go for it. I didn't know if you said gold at first, and then when you said has no genitals, I'm like, okay, thank God. I think you said God.
So we all have the aspects one way or another.
Yeah.
And I would say the biggest thing that I have, well, during lockdown, the huge thing that I learned and a big thing that we were dealing with in the men's groups every day was female hormones, because so many of the men were in a home, no one's going anywhere, with not just premenstrual, because people were used to that, but
Perimenopausal women. Woohoo!
Exactly. And it's a huge thing in all our lives.
Yes.
How long has this been going on, and why has no one talked about it? It's
Right.
ridiculous.
Then we go back to
It's
the patriarchy
huge.
and how this has not been studied, and how there's, it's a 20-year cycle of a woman's life. And right, for the most part, not much is known about it.
And what's so interesting is the way a man, in my experience, including myself, in a split second can turn into a scared little boy.
Yes.
Because it's like, oh my God, what have I done wrong? How do I fix this? How do I make it okay? And the little boy needs to be safe.
Yeah.
And this brings me to what you said right in the beginning, Ted, and it's so spot on. The male inclination is to fix. Mm-hmm. How do I put this right? How do I fix this so I'm not in trouble? I'm safe. I'm not going to be excluded or shamed or blah, blah, blah. And for me, it's the scared little boy that just needs to be safe. Mm-hmm. And what I have learned and what we have learned as facilitators and as men in my life is how to be with the vulnerability rather than fix it or running away from it or intellectualize or, be with it.
Yeah.
Be present with it. Take it sometimes. Take the madness and be solid with it. Let everything come up and let everything pass, because I've got my madness to come up.
Yeah.
My wife's got her madness. I don't have anyone in my life without madness, because that would be grave suppression.
I want to hear, Ted, what you have to say, but I'm having a little giggle inside of using the perimenopausal woman as a stand-in for how, let's say, men in this case relate to the world, right? Like how you relate to your perimenopausal partner if you're heterosexual. There is this kind of madness that can come through this, a lot of emotions, depression, anxiety, all of these, and they move fast, like the weather, it's like changing very fast. And the world is very similar, right? And we're talking about, okay, how do we support men to mature or to have access to their mature parts, the parts that can witness that young, scared part within, and still make decisions that are good for themselves and the people around them. So that the part of adding the perimenopausal women just made me giggle a little bit. So anything, Ted, that you want to add to what Kenny said?
Well,
take it away, Ted.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. And there were a couple of things that when it made me think about trauma, men in trauma, and that there has to be hope and healing for men, and that trauma, we all experience it. But with men, because we don't get to really, we're not taught to go through a process of what we're feeling. Yeah. And that's why even when problems come up, we just want to solve them. You don't want to go through the step. We want to go from the problem or hearing about the problem to now solving it. And there's all this in between that doesn't get processed, that doesn't get explored, and that pain that happened here still winds up being over here when we're addressing whatever it is, right? So we have this trauma that continues to go with us because we want to just solve the problem. So speaking about things, talking about things, finding space, as was mentioned, I think Jed mentioned the importance of us having space to talk about these things. And so I also wanted to mention just a few things around language that like toxic masculinity, for example, it's kind of the term that's out there. And what I found in working with men is that it really repels men, right?
Yeah.
So we can talk about that there's behaviors that we can say are toxic behaviors, but that masculinity and toxicity do not go together in ways that really men can embrace. It's seen as an attack on men, right? Yes. So, and I know that's not our intention, and I was using it for a long time, but with our work, we've gotten to that point. And the same thing with, and again, I'm not an expert, but in my own experience with my child and also in the communities that I'm in with queer folks in particular, that even gender nonconforming, there's also gender expansiveness, which feels a little different, because if you're gender nonconforming, as if you're supposed to conform and
As
you're
if you're
not, so
supposed
something's
to. Yes.
something, you're a little off because you're not conforming.
Yep.
So that's been recent in my language also. So you had mentioned in the beginning the importance of language, Shayna, and it continues to evolve. And men, we really need to hear things a certain way if we're going to listen to someone. For example, and I'll turn it back over. Call to Men was founded 22 years ago. We were founded out of the battered women's movement. So a lot of our work was through domestic violence and sexual assault coalitions. We were within the movement. So we were a call to men, and our tagline was ending violence against women. That was our tagline, but it didn't get a lot of men in the room, right? So we rebranded ourselves and so forth. And around 2012 or so, changed that to, while we worked with a lot of men, we changed it to a call to men, the next generation of manhood. Mm-hmm. Now, once you come into the door and sit in front of us, it's the same conversation it was when it was ending violence against women, but we have to present it in a way that invites men in, because patriarchy, because we talked about the systems, that the systems are being challenged, but when the systems are challenged, those systems rear their ugly heads and come out even harder and stronger. Yeah. So patriarchy gets challenged when we have to really be careful with the language and bringing men in and then bringing them along the way, meeting them where they're at.
Yeah, let me jump in on that too. I agree that language needs to be understood and challenged in different ways. And I had the good fortune in 1987, a colleague, Riane Eisler, a social scientist. Riane Eisler wrote a book called The Chalice and the Blade. And she talked about, she's a feminist, still is, as am I, but at the time when men were being denigrated, she said very strongly that this is not about men being bad and women being good or right or wrong. She said these are system changes, system differences. And she talked about a system of above and below as both systems of patriarchy and matriarchy. And she said what we need is to recognize that really what we're talking about are systems of domination versus partnership. Mm-hmm. That was in 1987, and I thought that was so clear, and it broke through this labeling of patriarchy as bad or masculinity as toxic, and recognize that really what we're dealing with are systems of either domination or partnership. And I just want to bring that language out because Rianne's been using it for, 40, 50 years. Mm-hmm. And I've also been recognizing it. I think it's a good language. And I just recommend, if you don't know her work, Riane Eisler, you check it out, because she's developed this in some very sophisticated and very helpful ways to what we're doing.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, Jed. And I also, sometimes when we talk, we don't talk about patriarchy or sexism even, but this is what it looks like in a male-dominated society, which gets closer to that point, because men can get that. Okay, you're not calling me a sexist. You're not saying that, I'm the patriarch of my family and I'm terrible.
And I'm toxic and I'm terrible and I'm awful. Right. We're just saying, yes. Okay. This is amazing. We could continue for hours and days, and you all have such incredible wisdom and experience. And again, thank you so much for being here. And I want to honor your time. So in our last couple of minutes, I just want to invite you to say, anything else that feels like we either haven't covered it, or you want to double click on it, or anything that's personally supported you that others, you think others could benefit from in this journey.
I would love to just lift up the importance of men being together as groups, which Kenny and Jed both, do so much wonderful work with, that to have those conversations. We do fellowship with each other, but it's usually, around a sports event, for example, more so than around what's going on with your life, and this is what's going on with mine, and to be able to share with each other. So I just want to put out to your audience the importance of men spending time in creating groups and circles to talk to each other.
Yeah, and to your point, right? Groups and circles that aren't just watching a sporting event, but actually being honest and real and creating a safe place to talk about those things that feel scary to talk about or the things that they don't, have anyone else to talk about them with. Thank you.
I feel listening to the two of you just then, our strapline at Men Speak is hang out, be heard, and get real. And for me, the hanging out bit is so important. Just to be able to hang out, to be quiet together, to laugh together, to just be together, to chill out without necessarily having to do anything. And I feel social media and so much nonsense where people need to show off. And for me, it's like, when have I shown off enough to be good enough and confident enough to hang out with someone? And to be heard rather than second guessed. Or so many men, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to say it wrong. I'm going to do it wrong. I'm going to be in trouble. I'm not going to say anything. I'll withdraw. But to speak out and to be heard and to learn and to get real with what's going on right here and right now and to accept life and to move on in that way together. So important and so weird how scared men and boys are off each other.
Yeah.
To be friends.
Weird.
To be together.
If it wasn't socialized, I would think it was weirder, but right. It's because it's socialized. Becomes the norm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now my inner DJs are playing Dionne Warwick. What the world needs now is love, sweet love.
Thank you.
Yeah, one thought I'd like to leave us with is this, that just honoring this 300th gathering of men's talk together with a woman gathering us. And I'm going to put in a plug that these not end. Obviously, whatever's right for you will be right for you, but I think there's some real power, number one, in what's emerging right now. I think in the last number of years, I've been doing it a long time, with a dialogue about men and men being critical to the well-being of men, women, children, and the planet, that I don't want it to get lost. And I just want to plug in for the possibility, at least, that you continue doing this, or that there be a form where that the men's dialogue with a leader from a woman or a co-lead or something continue on. Because, and on the other side of thing, I think there's a real need for things that are focused primarily on women and women's issues that have a man, as part of that dialogue. And my final word, just to recognize the perimenopausal and menopausal world you mentioned of women. But as you know, I wrote a book called Male Menopause many years ago that really surfaced for the first time, at least in the national and international community, that men also go through a hormonally driven change of life. And I think that reality needs to be recognized as an introduction to elderhood for both of us. So let's keep this dialogue going and not lose the male focus, the female focus, and how those things can come together for good.
Thank you. Yeah. And I can feel where, as a woman, in this space, right, it's so important for men to gather as men, to have that safe place to be heard by other humans who feel similar or the same, right? And I think there is a lot to be gained also, right, from I don't know if it's cross-gender or now all gendered conversation as well. So yeah, we'll see where Man Alive goes. And I appreciate each of you for, like I said, it takes something to be in the trenches for decades and do what you're doing. And thank you for making a huge difference in the world and for making it safe for men to grow and to love themselves and, you know, to be part of the world and communities and families in a way that feeds themselves and feeds everyone around them. Thank you
And
so
you
much for
have
being here.
Thank you, Shayna.
You've fed us and served us for so many years.
Mm.
Thank you so much. And to be here for the 300th, that's an honor.
Yes.
Good on you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.